formulation. Then custodial credit risk. You say that manages custodial credit risk by limiting its investments to highly rated. That's not, the investments are not the issue in custodial credit risk. It's who holds the securities. So you got mixed up here. Your custodian doesn't collateralize anything. He holds it in your name.
Right. Well, that reduces the credit risk of
Well, that should eliminate it.
Right.
But what you're saying is you manage the custodial credit risk by limiting investments to highly rated institutions. The fact that you have an investment in a highly rated institution
doesn't affect the custodial risk. It's a fair point.
point.
It's reducing credit risk, not custodial credit risk.
You got mixed up here.
Okay.
And
got,
then you got in the next paragraph, all such investments are not subject to custodial credit risk. Well, same problem, sort of problem. Running down.
All in all, while Mr. Kaplan and some of the other folks are looking, a lot of just to go through it all, a lot of the debt that you issue, is it to advance refund old debt as well as new money? I mean, do you have certain percent, certain behind you're shaking your head, I think.
well, we do a combination. We don't have the authority to advance refund. Housing is limited in that way. We do, in effect, refund debt on a somewhat steady basis in order to reduce our cost of funds.
Okay.
So by doing that, we increase our spread, which allows us to basically make money, which we then pour back. So it is a constant process for us, so that we lower our cost of capital as best we can, and then basically we raise monies which then go back in as subsidy. So in fiscal 2014, we put in $185 million of our revenue as 1% loans to reduce the otherwise cost of capital. So it is this constant sort of process for us.
Rather than a specific target, you just keep doing it.
We're always doing it, and so that whenever we can do that, it allows, we make money.
Absolutely.
and then we put it back in. That's what we're doing with our money.
Terrific.
That's the typos.
I've expected that.
They put them in there just so you have something to do.
Again, at some point in time, you used to assist the housing authority, didn't NYCHA?
That's an interesting thing. Yes, we've done many transactions, including a very large one in December. And I was at the rollout of their new plan, Next Generation NYCHA, that the mayor spoke at yesterday. And so we work with NYCHA to finance debt for them. We are their capital markets partner.
Okay.
And through either our financing, we've been able to help them leverage federal monies. We've also been a source for, and the mayor, the new plan speaks a lot about building of new affordable and middle and market rate housing on NYCHA land. The way the NYCHA campuses were built, there's a lot of additional space that can be built on. So we expect over the 10-year plan that we will be a partner in a lot of those transactions and providing subsidy and capital market access, low-income housing tax credits, et cetera. So we've done a lot with NYCHA. We expect to continue doing that over the next 10 years.
Are there any other questions? Thank you again.
Great.
Very
Our
well
pleasure.
done. Very,
Here
very
you
good.
go. What's that?
Be careful, don't
Disconnect the wires.
Great. Thank you.
I see you all. Thank you all for coming. Take care, Mr. Nelson.
Great seeing you, Bernie. Have a good summer.
You too. All the very best to you, sir.
Excuse me.
The next order of business is the OPEB plan. Okay, let them.
Pass me the OPEB report.
Okay, the next order of business is the city OPEB plan and its activities since 2014. I ask that you speak up, please. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
So I'm Nicole Fleming. I'm the Director of Accounting Services for OMB.
Simone Sewak, New York City Office of Management and Budget.
David Jeter, Assistant Controller of Asset Management.
John Gibney from the Office of the Actuary.
Sherry Chan, also from the Office of the Actuary.
Thank you all. You have a little
Wait, may I interrupt just for one moment? I think our last speaker may need a little bit more introduction.
I know.
Sherry is the new chief actuary for the City of New York and for the pension systems. She just started this week, and we're very glad she was able to be with us. Thank you.
I was pleased to meet Ms. Janet, and I appreciate Mr. Gibney introducing us separately to me. Okay, you have a presentation. What are you going to go to the MD&A or?
Oh, just a couple of
Go ahead,
high level.
Go ahead.
So as you're aware, the Retiree Benefits Trust Fund is separate. Well, the plan is separated into two parts. One is the trust itself, which is the mechanism which the city uses to pay for some retiree OPEB benefits. And the second is the non-trust OPEB, which are benefits that the city pays directly from general resources each year. As you'll see from the statements themselves, there was a precipitous increase in the net position at the end of the year. That was due in large part to the fact that the city made a deposit of $864 million into the trust.
What was that?
The city made a deposit.
How much was the amount?
$864 million. Where in prior years the city had actually utilized monies in the trust as drawdowns. So that explains the largest portion of the increase from prior year. For the last 3 fiscal years, the actual benefit payments from the trust have remained relatively level. There was a slight increase in fiscal 14 due to a late year agreement in health benefits that was then retroactively applied to the full fiscal year. And that was roughly about $100 million. So there really hasn't been any large increases in costs for the OPEB trust itself. And it's always a question that is asked. The actuarial accrued liability for the trust itself is $71 billion.
Bigger than a bread box, isn't it, Nicole?
It is a little bit larger than a bread box, yes.
I'm glad you got to it. Go ahead.
But I will say that the bread box has stayed level from last year's number, relatively. So that's a good sign, at least. So that's the culmination of my presentation. Any questions that anybody has, please ask.
I guess I've always turned to Mr. Curry on this. The $71 billion, I mean, it really would become an obligation of the city of New York to close down, right?
Yes.
As long as we're in business.
Under the way the standards work today, as long as you're in business, it's a disclosure, but it's not technically a liability. But if New York had a Detroit, as an example, then suddenly that number would really be real. Yeah.
Yeah. No. And I think once, and I don't mean to misquote you, you said that in the private sector, they don't necessarily record what they contribute to the.
They don't fund, right?
In other words, it's the pay-go. What they're paying out is that they're going to record.
Yeah, they don't fund. They record, but they don't fund.
Thank you.
Difference.
Yeah. Of course, what would the IRS say about that if they did the other? They
They don't get the tax
They don't get the
deduction
tax deduction
until it's actually
paid,
Okay.
where in a pension plan, they make a contribution to the plan, they get that tax deduction.
That was when I said to you that I thought Gatsby, the air, where they're in Norwalk, Connecticut, is a little different than it is elsewhere. It's the stupidest thing in the world.
You know, on one floor you got Gatsby, on the next floor you got FASB. I mean, it's, you know.
But I mean, what was...
You know, I don't agree with you, Bernie.
No, I know you don't, because it could come a day when there's a day of reckoning.
There's an
but-
annual significant cost attached to this.
No,
thing.
there is.
And you can't put your head in the sand.
No,
and
you
given
can't.
the way this is a union town, there's no chance that the city council in its wisdom is going to say goodbye to this liability.
No, of course not. I'm not implying that.
I think the reality is, Bernie, that in both the private companies and in public sector, as analysts are looking more and more at entities, they're looking at these kinds of numbers and saying, it's, you know, these are big numbers. How does it impact? And it's not so much the city of New York, but if you had if you had 5 Detroits in the country, then that has an impact on bond ratings for the, as the guys, as the people in the budget bureau would tell you, that has an impact directly on the bond ratings of all the other governments. So it all comes down to, these kinds of numbers are looked at because they're obviously a future obligation that our great-grandchildren will be paying, or somebody in the future is going to continue to pay, and that's just a reality. But it doesn't have an impact today unless there's a major crisis, or you get a lot of major crises in other parts of the country. Is that a fair statement for the
That's a
budget
fair
side?
statement.
Yeah.
I thank you for your comments.
If I might, it's probably an unfair question given the fact that the actuary just started. But
It was my 15th hour on the job.
right. But over the last few years, the actuarial accrued liability has bounced around more because of the process of defining that and recalculation and reestimate. I guess I'm wondering if we're coming to a stable position where we might expect that number to kind of stick to the level it's at, or we have another significant actuarial review in the works that might change it.
There are multiple answers to your question.
There always is.
Oh, there always are, that's right. With respect to the accrued liability, we changed the funding method. This is the second year that we're under the entry age normal actuarial cost method. And that dropped the accrued liability from somewhere in the, I think it was 87,000 down to 87 billion, excuse me, down to 71 billion. So this is the second year that we're under entry age, and the accrued liability has actually stayed flat because we had about $5 billion of gains last year. It should have grown to about 75 billion. So yes, we are at a point where under the entry age normal cost method, you'll be able to see what it should be year over year and how it compares actually year over year, and to analyze the changes by identifying individual gains and losses. Now, we met yesterday as a group to do our OPEB kickoff meeting for next year. And in fact, Michelle was at the meeting and Nicole and Simone were there, and we discussed any changes that may be forthcoming. And as you all know, the city is audited biennially in accordance with the city charter's mandate. And Gabriel Roeder Smith, GRS, has completed the first of their 2 biennial audits. They're completing the second of their 2, and they presented to your committee back in March.
Yes,
the
yes,
first,
they did so.
and they mentioned back then that there has been more improvement in mortality, and that they would be recommending in changes to the mortality assumptions. So there's an expectation that mortality improvements will increase your accrued liability, and that you will see that, if not in this year's or fiscal year 15's valuation, then in 16 and beyond's valuation.
Of course, it's an unfair question. Do you have any idea what the magnitude of that type of thing that we're talking
It's
about?
the estimates, when the new mortality tables that the society put out were published, the estimates were between 7 and 10% of an increase in liability of between 7 and 10%. So a 10% increase would be a reasonable ballpark.
$7 billion.
And on the other side of this, you're reasonably comfortable with the projected health insurance costs that you've been using?
We looked at the cost, we look at all the OPEB-specific assumptions on an annual basis. We compare we value premiums, we compare the increases year over year, we look at the healthcare cost trend rate, and although the city has been managing those costs very, very well over the last several years, we're comfortable with the current healthcare cost trend rate assumptions, and there will be no changes for the upcoming year.
Thank you. Then another unfair question. Not for you. I was very pleased to see that there was a significant infusion into the fund this year, but I haven't noticed anywhere any statement, which I would say a statement of intent. Is this to be a trend, a one-time shot? Is there anything that's been publicly stated about where we're going?
What did we put in this year? Yeah. 290?
I don't think.
Okay. So for the fiscal year 2015 executive budget, we put in another $280 million on top of what we put in fiscal 14. So the mayor has made ample use of various stabilization funds and trust funds in this past fiscal year, and I believe that is the intention going forward, assuming revenues stay elevated.
Thank you.
It's good to do that because on some of the lean years, I mean, we start again. Do we pay these items first from the trust fund, and then if we have to, you'll use the regular general fund for the pay-as-you-go?
So, yes, but that also depends on the current fiscal health of the budget in that year.
Of course.
So in years where it's lean, yes, the city would make use of the assets in the trust fund. And in years when it's not, the city, as in fiscal 14, can opt to actually increase the deposit into the trust fund.
The other thing, the big driver of the costs are the health care, right? The health care costs, I think. I asked you this many years ago.
And I wrote it down this morning.
Oh, no. I'll write it down too.
I broke it into four categories.
Go ahead.
Healthcare, pre and post Medicare, welfare funds, and Medicare Part B. And pre-Medicare healthcare is 40% of the liability.
Pre-Medicare is 40%. Go ahead.
Medicare healthcare for those eligible for Medicare is 20%.
Okay.
The welfare funds are 20%.
Then you say welfare, that excludes health costs?
That's the annual contribution that the city makes to each of the union welfare funds.
Okay, got it.
But
I call it the
includes some
tax.
healthcare costs.
Yeah, all right.
If the welfare fund pays health care.
Yeah.
And the Part B liabilities represent the remaining 20%. The reimbursement of the Medicare Part B premiums.
Okay.
40, 20, 20, and 20 rounded. They're all
Well, that's
rounded.
fine. I mean, I like round numbers.
And on the 40,
I used to get beaten up on the Medicare Part B.
the pre-Medicare part, I'm sorry, is that substantially uniform, or do you have a breakup between uniform and civilian on that number?
I didn't do.
How about doing that for
I didn't
next
do
year?
that. I did it from what's publicly available in the report. If you'd like a breakdown.
Yeah, I'd be interested because I think a substantial cost is associated with the fact that we have so many uniform employees who can retire fairly early, and that's building up what this liability is. So we just have an understanding of what's driving the cost.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Some portion of the welfare, I think, would be health care, but all right, that's good enough this way.
Medical. When I say pre and post, that's the medical piece of the
Yes, no.
benefit.
What do you use as an inflator now on the medical piece?
It's graded, and it began at nine. I guess it began at 9.5, and it grades down in 0.5% increases to 5. The ultimate trend rate is 5%.
So you really reduced it. Otherwise, all we'd be
Pre-med.
paying is health care.
Medicare is at 5.
I mean, I've just started to say anecdotally, I used to get beaten up by the Medicare Part B. Why? Because at that time the city didn't reimburse the full cost. So periodically, as those costs went up, we testify in front of the council. It was me, and we gave back about half. I mean, it was. I don't think there's a company in the world that would pay Medicare Part B costs. The city's a very, very good employer when you think about it. Who would pay Medicare Part B costs?
If you have a union.
And how many private employers, as soon as you reach 65, they throw you off to health care and you have, because you get Medicare. So at least pay the Part B costs, but they don't.
It's not just the private sector. Most governments don't do it either.
Government, we're good. Okay.
And the trick is not to get to 65.
All right. Okay. Are there any other questions?
I have a couple.
Go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, no, God, you first.
Go ahead.
So, the city's announced a healthcare savings plan, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right?
Yes, sir.
How do you expect that to impact this calculation?
So right, Simone, we did discuss that yesterday. We went through each of the pieces, and we will not.
You say pieces,
Well,
what do you mean?
We know what's publicly available. We know what we read in what's
On like OLR's website, for example? Is that what you mean by publicly available?
or in the Daily News.
Okay. You're a big subscriber to the facts printed in the Daily News for your calculation?
I look at all publicly available information.
Okay.
Taking that, we do take that into account, and based on those expected savings, we will not change the assumptions in the upcoming year.
But those, you're saying based on the expected savings for fiscal year 15.
That's correct.
And when would those impact your calculation? Because there's a plan of savings for 15, 16, 17, 18, and then recurring savings going out into the future, and perhaps additional savings based on that, because the dynamic of working with the workforce to generate savings and splitting the difference. I mean, I'm just interested in how that plan would eventually be folded into your calculation.
Currently, we're not changing any of the assumptions. The only thing that's been announced, and I'm doing this from memory, so I apologize, is a $400 million savings in the upcoming year.
Yep. In this year.
We review the assumptions every year. There's pending litigation. There are potential changes to the Obamacare. All of these things are looked at on an annual basis. And in total, the decision was made to not make any changes to the larger actuarial assumptions. There will be some minor changes to some of the smaller assumptions, but nothing related to the proposed savings, healthcare savings, as announced by the city.
So when would those savings become a factor in your calculation?
When we see in the experience how they're actually impacting the cost of the benefits that the city purchases.
Yeah, sure.
So that means that the 400 savings in fiscal year 15, if they were
there's no ties on it, right?
documented to be actual savings rather than a plan of savings, then that would just be rolled in at some point.
That's correct.
So each year's savings, if they materialize, will eventually get folded into the calculation.
Or they may result in a change to our assumptions on a going forward basis. But as of yet, nothing has been realized.
Well, I'm asking the question of if they are realized, what's the, because if you get to the point where you have a recurring savings of 1.3 billion off a base of like 6 to 8 billion, I'm just imagining that might impact the calculation.
Where's the savings going to come from? Where is it going to come from? We value healthcare premiums, we value welfare fund contributions, we value Medicare Part B premiums. Where is that savings going to come from?
Well, if you
Is it
look,
going to come from a reduction in the premiums that the city pays?
well, if you take any one of the examples for 14 or for 15, for example, like the dependent eligibility audit, I think the estimate for fiscal year 15 of that is a reduction in premium of 108 million because people who are not eligible will be off the rolls.
Okay,
Now
so
that will be a reduction
we looked
in
at
that
the-
example.
We looked at the audit, and the information provided to us as of June 30th of 2014, the results of the audit are not in the data yet.
I know. I'm not saying they are. I'm just asking when these things are documented, I would expect that it would affect the calculation of the actual liability.
Yes.
And if you have a documented recurring 1.3 billion on a base of like 6 to 8 billion, I would assume that would be a fairly significant reduction in the liability if those recurring savings are materialized.
Yes.
Thank you.
You've got a chart in here on page 13 about the diversification requirements. So what I see here is that you could go anywhere, for federal stuff, you can go up to 100%. I guess it's all right. If you mind going, it's the same problem you had with another one. On page 15, this description of custodial credit risk is still not right.
We'll look at that again.
It says for investment, custodial credit risk is the risk to
Top of the
the
page.
top of the trustee bank. The trustee will not be. And then you talk about the outside party. Is that the trust bank that you're talking about there? And then it says investment security exposed to custodial risk. If the security is uninsured, that has nothing to do with custodial risk. They're assured. The securities which the custodian holds may be uninsured, and therefore the securities flop, not the custodian.
So the reference to outside parties.
I think that paragraph needs to be.
Yeah, we'll look at the whole
reworded.
paragraph.
It's not right.
Okay.
Somebody was in the business.
John, you indicated that in the scope of services that Gabriel Rhoda will provide, they will also be looking at the OPEB.
No, sir, they don't look at the OPEB, but we use the same mortality assumption for both
I see.
pension and retiree medical.
So if they bless what you're using on the pension funds, they'll use it
So
here.
if and when the actuaries proposes a new set of actuarial assumptions to include a new mortality assumptions, they will apply to both pension and to OPEB.
You're consistent, though.
Yes, sir.
But they will not opine on the OPEB.
No, sir, it's an audit of, it's
Oh,
an
okay.
experience study on the pension side, not
Just on the
not-
pensions.
That was established in the beginning so that we wouldn't have a disconnect between them. I always wanted that to be lockstep together.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
Oh, are there any other members of the committee? Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Jenna, for being here.
You got some other stuff.
Nice to meet you.
Ooh, getting violent.
Yeah, I got it further towards you.
Yeah.
Missy Capital.
Actually, I have that.
That's fine. Thanks, Bernie.
The next is the audit report. I'm sorry, the report by the Audit Bureau of the Controller's Office.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thanks. Take care.
This is last meeting.
Yeah, this is the last item.
No,
because
for
they-
him. For the actuary.
No, assistant.
This one over.
You'll introduce, well, let's get
Okay.
seated. Buddy.
Casey's kind of happy to. Okay.
Okay, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, good morning. I'm Marjorie Landa. I'm the Deputy Controller for Audit. I have with me today Alma Fana, who is the Assistant Deputy Controller for Financial Audit. My other Assistant Deputy Controllers and Directors are not here, as we are trying very hard to finish up in this fiscal year a lot of work, and we're really on target to get quite a bit out by the end of June, and getting, if we're lucky, close to double what we did in the fiscal year that we're reporting on today.
I was just curious, the 2014 is the fiscal year 2014?
Yes.
So I think I noticed one of the audits with flipping through with 2013. Is there any reason for that?
Yeah, well, the audits, the fiscal year begins in July of 2013.
Okay. All right.
So we'll have audits that were closed in 2013. They started, could be as early as 2011. Hopefully not so much.
And what do you consider a completed audit once the agencies have given you their comments?
Yes, and then we issue it as a final audit. It's, the process that we undergo under GAGAS and the way in which we've interpreted it involves us issuing first a very preliminary, informal draft to the agency. And we have an exit conference at which we gather comments, and then we issue our formal draft. That's the report that we get comments from them on. So our final looks very much like the draft we've issued to them. It just incorporates their comments and any discussion back and forth, if there is, that we have in follow-up to the comments the agency's made.
And how much time do you give the agencies to comment?
For the formal draft, it will be 10 days.
10 days?
Mm-hmm. 10 business days.
Yeah.
Occasionally, when needed, we will give them more time, but everybody in the city knows this drill pretty well now and understands that's the time that they get. They get quite a bit of time before then, because this is really the ultimate game of, is that your final answer?
No, but until you get to that point, I was just trying to get the timing straight, yeah. So, on the potential cost savings, I'll just quickly go to that. You had a very large one. What page was it again? 51, all right. The water and sewer system and the determination of water rates. You're being critical of the customer information system, essentially their billing system, I guess.
Yeah, this was a very contested audit with DEP.
Their billing system was contested over the years. I was in the government for many years. There was a big problem with it, but go ahead. Why don't you elaborate on it? It's a big number.
It is a big number, and one of the things I will note that in some of the audits that we do, most notably one outside of this fiscal year, but there just came out last week with the Housing Authority, every once in a while they say, yes, you're right, and they immediately start implementing the recommendations we've made. This is not one of those.
I was saying.
This is really an example of a very different kind of issue that the Audit Bureau faces. We will go make our recommendations, and sometimes it feels like throwing a pebble down a well. And one of the initiatives that we have undertaken in this administration is what we are calling the Controller's Audit Assessment Team, which is trying to leverage the resources that the Audit Bureau has and the resources the full Controller's Office has. So that in situations like this one with the Water Board, where we don't have full compliance, we don't have full acceptance for our recommendations, that we may have other avenues to approach the issues, because audit is what audit is. It's one limited but vital part of the checks and balances. So we use the audit results and what the agencies don't agree to for our risk assessments, and within audit trying to determine whether we're going to go do a different audit or a follow-up audit. But now, under this administration, we're also going agency-wide and looking what other issues and what other avenues we might have as an agency outside of the Audit Bureau to approach those issues. And this Water Board issue is indeed has a real potential for something we're going to follow up in other ways.
In the public company sector, if you get an audit report like this from your internal auditor, you typically get it to the audit committee. If you don't get a satisfactory management response, you bring in the management to that committee and you tell the manager, if he or she doesn't have a good explanation, that he or she is on a short string. Why isn't there some enforcement mechanism available to you?
It's a great question, and it's one that gets debated in the audit circles, in government audit circles, quite a bit, as to what really the role is. One of the real strengths, I think, of this audit bureau is our independence. We work for an elected official who is not part of the mayoralty. And that's really important because I think you have a more objective eye. We can more easily retain the independence that's essential to what we do.
Would it help if we said to you, if they take the water board, which is a chunk of money and an unsatisfactory response, if we invited the water board in here to the audit committee of the City of New York?
They do come in here.
No. And specifically to focus on why they're not in compliance with this report.
They don't agree with it.
Maybe if I could also interject here. One of the things that I always find missing here, the first is that I have to read the whole report to find out what's important. It'd be nice if I had some kind of highlights and executive summary.
I've got notes here. I could have told you, but anyway, yes.
Okay. And the second part is that I'm pretty much well aware that there's a balance to this, which is the Office of Operations that works with the agencies when they respond to this. It would be very helpful if, when there is a contentious issue here, that not only was this made present to us, but something from the Office of Operations, which would basically be representing the administration about how they're working with the entity. So we'd have both parts of the equation. This is probably absolutely correct in a bang-up job and whatever, but it would also be, if somebody's not agreeing with it, we have a body that represents the administration and reviews these and an active part of it. It'd just be helpful to have them part of what we see here. I'm looking at you, George.
Yeah, I'm feeling this going over my shoulder. It's really, they're great questions, and I think that's something you folks might really consider also in how you structure this. One of the things that I think is really notable looking at these, and I think the Water Board's a good example, the audit that we did of the Verizon franchise, another great example of this. Very technical issues. Professionals, you have your competing experts may well disagree. Verizon was one of those examples, though, I see repeatedly, which is we got a really vigorous opposition. I walked into the office, I saw papers this tall from the lawyers. I am one. I know what things we generate. Bad people. A lot of paper and a lot of argument. It was forceful. And at the end of the day, they paid the $1.41 million that we told them they owed. They were technical arguments. I understood what both sides said. This was not done on my watch, but it was one of the things I looked at before I came in very closely, and I think we did a great job. You'd be hearing point, counterpoint on technical issues, which you're all well versed in. And, we come to this, though, with the city's interest at heart and an independence. So we're not looking where you have a private company like Verizon, they're looking at their bottom line. We're looking at the city's interest. So I think we're the honest broker here.
But I think maybe it's our process in the audit committee. Instead of just having the Bureau of Audit's presentation to us, which we read through and try to identify what the important issues are, I would really think if we could invite the Office of Operations to do a presentation at the same time, and part of what we want to do is identify which of these are most important. Some of these are really small dollars. I don't expect this forum to sit here and discuss them, but I would like to pick out things like the Water Board, okay, where it's a real issue, and hear more of what the real issues are. And then after hearing what the Office of Operations said or whatever, and your presentation, if we want, then we would be, I think, the appropriate time to say to the Water Board, okay, we've heard this, we'd now like you to come in and make a presentation to us. So it would work us to what the real issues are. I feel with the format, I'm not saying you, but to what we as the Audit Committee, by simply asking to read this, I'm struggling to figure out which ones we really should be talking about.
No, it's a good point. There are others that are. I just focused on this one because it was so large. And the other thing is, again, This may not answer your question, but on the water board, they come before us, the audit committee. Deloitte are their auditors.
Michelle's trying to jump in.
I'm sorry. Finish your thought, Bernie.
No,
We didn't have this information when they came in, Bernie,
No,
so we
that's
couldn't
my,
ask these
you know,
questions.
I think we need to refix our format. And I'm not commenting on this, but how we use it.
There's another thing.
There's a history here with the, I mean it, I was around when the water board and the water authority was established. It's great that they established it because the
My
revenue
issue has
system-
nothing to do with the fact that it's the water board. It's the fact how we're going through the
No,
process
I
and identifying what we
understand.
want
But
to focus on.
Bernie, if you don't mind now, I'll...
It's a very important issue.
I'd like to suggest that if the other members of the committee agree with Bud's suggestion, that maybe we ask the mayor's rep to go back and discuss it with the Office of Operations to see if they are willing to become part of the process in that way.
Well, could I expand it a little, Michelle?
Please.
And that is, there are many instances here in which the organization says we agree and doesn't. And there are a number in which they agree partially and do some, and some they don't agree at all. I am accustomed to seeing when that happens, what the response of the auditor is to the non-response of the auditee.
Yeah.
So you kind of close the gap. And to add to what we're looking at, if we have somebody in here, we don't now know how significant the non-responses are. So to help us understand and help you, some it's not quantification, but some idea of prioritizing where you'd like the pressure to be put.
I think they're kind enough, since I'm chairman of the audit committee, to send me copies of the final audits. I think if you looked at that, it's been a while since I've looked at this one, there's a lot of detail as to how they arrived at the funding that they did, the amount of money.
No,
The thing, though, is, I remember, there's no question that the establishment of the water authority or water board, whatever you want to say, has been very important economically to this city.
Bernie, could you speak up? Sorry.
I'm sorry. It enabled them to have enough funding to actually do some of the federal pollution controls without bankrupting the city, but without doing that. So I think they've done a tremendous job over the years. One of the criticisms at the beginning was the accounts receivable system. People lost jobs because of it. I gather excellent people, hardworking people, and it was a problem. It was a problem. And that's why I got right away to the customer information system. It sounds to me like if I remember, that's a good part of the 42 million. And I don't know, maybe it would be a good idea to what you're saying about the Office of Operations. Let me turn to the auditors. Did you have a copy of this report of the audit that the Audit Bureau did when you did your audit of the...
This goes back, I think, to the prior administration at the time. It was shared draft briefly because it was still in, a draft. And obviously...
it was issued in December of 2013.
But we weren't privy to those conversations between the audit and the water board.
It's a significant, if they're right, it's a significant amount of money, even in light of the,
Something that needs to be discussed internally.
I know. Oh. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
A couple of comments I have. To me, sometimes you say that the agency says they did something. And I'm looking at one now that the report was issued in October 2013, but has it been verified from that point to now that they did do that? A. And B, just to follow up on something Bud said, could we get an executive summary? I don't want to read 30 agencies about local law 36 or 10 agencies about proper use of Easy Pass. It's what is the real need? Yes, I realize the potential dollar savings because you're recouping Easy Pass. You got $1 million, I'd be totally shocked. You spend a lot of time reading this, only to find out that they didn't issue a report to the commissioner for local law 36 for 2012 and 2013 and even 2014. And too much time was spent reading this for all those agencies. this might be important to the city council, it's their law, but I don't want to focus on Local Law 36.
I hear what you're saying, and we'll try to make the next presentation of the report a little clearer for you folks. But
you guys to the city council, an executive summary for this audit committee.
I appreciate that completely, and I'm actually going to stick up a little bit for some of the smaller audits, which may be of less interest to you. Obviously, the dollar volume that we do in a lot of our audits is quite significant, and those potentials, I think, are huge for the city, and it's part of the important mission we have. But we do have a broader mission here, and I'm going to speak from having been on both sides of an audit. I've been audited by this audit bureau before I came to work for them, and we actually had in the agency I was at, so the Easy Pass audit and the driver's audits. They were actually huge, and a number of other things that would probably bore you to tears because they're real guts of administration for the agencies. But no, I understand what you're talking about. I still have to stick up for those audits. They're important.
I'm saying an executive summary, a summary.
Absolutely.
Of the agencies and what were the findings across them.
Yes, I hear that.
Reading 20 agencies.
Your
message is received, and we'll get you an executive summary when we come back.
I was just going to say, if I may, you were, I think when you first addressed us, when you were introduced to us, you said you would come if we had the time periodically to brief us on your work to date. I guess you've been too busy because it's almost a year. No, I'm not being facetious. And maybe that's another factor, like, I know, maybe in the fall or something, when the calendar is not so crazy. October's meeting is impossible because we have the annual financial statements to come in and give us, to answer some of these issues that have come up.
Sure.
And you don't have to, at that it's a little more informal, you don't have to be fixed at only 14, 15, just a broad overview. I think that would be very helpful.
And just to go back before we leave this, I don't want to wait until next year. We have a report here. I think it would be worthwhile if definitely. Somehow we could develop what we consider to be the executive summary, the key issues, and I'd like to request that the mayor's office, through the Office of Operations, or whoever they choose as the appropriate body, be able to come back to us with some kind of comments so that we can use them to evaluate what's going on here.
May I make a suggestion? Right now is a very bad time for the Audit Bureau. They're trying to get through a bunch of audits that need to be completed. Perhaps after your busy season, you might think about what would be a good format for an executive summary for us, and it may be more like, one comment about a particular law and all of the agencies that are having compliance issues. And at that point, we can also discuss with the mayor's office what the appropriate interplay would be.
Well, I think we could start the discussion with the mayor's office in operation before waiting, because I think without doing the full they probably know which are the key issues which could be communicated to the mayor's office in operation, so they could start their part of the process to be able to respond to some of these issues.
Makes sense.
I would add,
yeah, George, go ahead.
Seeing half the picture here, and what you're not seeing is...
George, could you stand? It's easier to hear you if you stand, or come to the table.
What you're not seeing is the agency's response.
Right. Yeah. Which is part of what I would hope you would make available to us if you agree or disagree with it.
These documents are public, and to the extent that there are particular audits that you're interested in before these meetings, and pending how this process resolves itself, those responses could be shared. And then after you look through that, then we could try to work toward resolving particular issues.
Right. So I think the part of it is to divide what are some of the key issues, or are there issues across many agencies, so that we could take that body and then work with you to find out whether there's things we should be really speaking out about.
And the actual reports themselves have our audit, they have the response from the agency in them, it's a part of it, and then they have the back and forth where there are specific issues.
We identified one or two of these which were particularly important, then what we might want to do is just take the full audit and read it instead of reading all this on many things that are not anywhere near as significant. I might be more valuable commenting on that than some of what I'm seeing in this. I have. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I just turned the page and there was a CUNY. It says CUNY report that 5 recommendations have been implemented and that the remaining recommendation had not yet been implemented. We don't know what that is.
Yeah, and we can spell out for you.
That would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Let me make one serious point and then another losing one. The serious point is that sometimes things which have low monetary value reveal bad management and corruption. Where you have in here discussing inspectors and things like that, periodically some investigative arm of the city turns up all kinds of nastiness in the way inspectors are paid off, the way things are done. And while I agree that the misuse of a MetroCard or card is nothing in monetary terms, it is very often symptomatic of bad behavior in an organization and lack of tight management. And I would not like to lose sight of that fact. And the mere fact that it adds up to a fraction of what the water board is doing, the water board stuff is an issue not of the integrity of the management, but of a view of how to do it. Whereas the other things reveal a whole attitude by groups of employees about thumbing their nose at the rule system. And that latter one, it can be as important as the former in the long run.
I really agree with you wholeheartedly, and I would say as you're looking at this, one of the ways where it really meets in the audits we do is the contract oversight, where we are auditing either a contract itself or sometimes the agency's oversight. For instance, we have in here Department of Education oversight of custodial supply contract. Okay, it's a great innovation, supposedly money savings. They were pulling together all of the custodial supplies with one supplier. The contract itself required a series of reports they were supposed to get regularly from the company. They didn't get them. They didn't ask for them. They didn't look at them. When we asked the agency for information, they went back to the company to get the things that DOE should have. That's your, perfect.
12 years as being chairman of the audit committee of the Board of Ed. That was a disease then. It's still a disease now.
And it is an example. It's actually one thing that this administration is quite focused on, and it really is. It's partly your local laws and your Easy Pass. That's what I have to say. It's really the administration of the agency. You find an agency, they want to do all the things agencies are supposed to do, and it's hard to do them. And then you have to oversee a private contractor too. Sometimes that's really hard. That's the part of your budget you've cut, is all of your oversight, your checks and balances. We are really a vital part of this coming in. I understand we need to report better in a way for you folks so that you don't have to page through things that are less important. Really what we do across the board, whether it's small or big, go towards the same thing. And I think you really...
Now my amusing one. You talk about all the organizations have to conserve paper and things like that, and yet you recite the same 3 paragraphs in a whole bunch of audits. There ought to be a format to save maybe 2 pieces of paper and a lot of ink.
Well, we do those in letter reports too. That makes it a little easier. That's our paper saving. So
I just point that out.
Appreciated. So just to give you a little bit more overview on what we have done, and maybe there are a few highlights, even though we didn't give you the executive summary. As I just said, procurement and contract management is really a very significant part of what we do and have done over in this fiscal year and in the coming years you will be seeing. So that one Department of Education audit, there was another one at Department of Education having to do with the milk contracting, and there we were finding some concerns about a lack of control to help ensure that there was no collusion. You have a very limited pool of vendors. With milk, it's sort of like cement. You've got a geographic area you have to pull from, and the economy is what it is. You have that a limited number of vendors. And so there were things that we recommended to the Department of Education that they do to minimize the collusion. We also did publicly announce the fact that we referred this to the Justice Department to take a look at. There was enough evidence that they did take it, at least to look at. I can't say what they have done with it, but at least we got it that far. Revenue and cost savings is obviously a huge part of what we do as well. So you talked about the water board, and I mentioned the Verizon franchise. We also looked at Department of Finance and the tax classifications. There are a lot of very basic things that finance could and should be doing in that regard to help ensure that they've actually got accurate information. Some of it is just following their own rules and their legal requirements. You have to do a reassessment, a view every 3 years. They weren't doing it, and there's a significant tax savings there. We're also looking at service delivery. Our management audit side is quite robust, and we looked at DHS and shelters. We looked at parks and recreation and swimming pools. We've looked at a whole variety of things. These are also very important, and they do affect the dollar bottom line for the city, and they affect something quite as important, which is how it is we provide our services, basic services to the citizens. Just a couple of notable things about the Audit Bureau. I was really proud to join this group. As I said, I'd been audited by them before, so I knew the quality of the work that was done. But I didn't know till I really got there the level of professionalism and how strong the GAGAS process is and the way it's been internalized here by my senior managers, which Alma is one. Our QA process is really robust. We have also, though, added to our Bureau in a couple of significant ways. We now have a research and investigations unit, which stands outside of the GAGAS audits, and they are there to sort of pick up on things like the milk collusion issues, where we had to go right to the Justice Department. We didn't know what we had. We now have a capacity to do some further investigation outside of the audit. And that's available for the whole Comptroller's office to utilize that function. They support the audits, but they're really independent of the audits. But we also have now a forensic audit group, which is helping us to both assess areas that we should be going into and to also assist the audit teams when they come up with issues that need a slightly different approach in terms of analysis. So we have a system that's not broken. It's a great, really strong system, and we're trying to enhance it with that and what I described as the Comptroller's Audit Assessment Team to do the kind of follow-up which I think is really critical to make what we do that more significant for the city as a whole.
I don't understand in the city government, as distinguished in the private industry, which I deal with, the relationship between what you are as internal audit and what the auditors are. And do you suggest things that they ought to look at? Do they suggest things you ought to look at? Or you're two totally independent groups?
We're completely independent of one another. We do look at what they do.
No, I understand that.
And we hope they look at what we do.
The same relationship.
But it's completely separate.
All right, good
It's
answer.
separate functions.
One of the things you do, I don't mean to delay you, but is you look at the administration of the union welfare funds.
Yes.
I remember having been here a number of years at one time, what commissions they were paying for insurance and things like that. It looked like collusion almost. Have you seen improvements over it? I mean, I've gotten some of those reports. I guess there have been improvements.
There absolutely have been improvements. There's a lot more transparency now that things are computerized, and we're actually looking to make a more systemic reporting feature, and they're slowly but surely all coming back up, and you actually, getting off of green sheets of paper and putting everything into databases so we can get better reporting. We're also looking to give a different kind of report. I know we do an aggregate report every year. We're restructuring it for the coming year, somewhat in the way that you're describing, wanting something that's a little more informative. So this is a sort of a legacy report. What you're looking at, the way we've reported on the welfare funds has historically been the same for eons. We're changing up a lot of those things with the hope of providing more information. And we have an ability to do that now because of changes in technology and reporting.
Okay, Ms. Lander, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
I hope to see you before a year.
Anytime you invite me, I'll come back.
Yeah, no, well, the agendas of, I remember you said that you would try.
I did mean it, and I do mean it. I now, having done this for a year and a half, realize I spend my day putting out fires, and sometimes my nights and my weekends. And I would love to come back, and I really do respond to invitations. I'm a longtime city government person, so I believe in this process.
Said that when you came,
so, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you both. Excellent, right, yeah. members of the committee, we'll take a little break before we go into executive session. Maybe you want some water or coffee or something. Jackie tells me there are two things we have to vote on. First,
And I'm going to ask to make a public statement to the record also.
okay, the Deloitte request on EDC and the one on the summer intern program. So do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion that we approve both.
I second.
Second? Okay. All right, so that's done.
That's done.
Okay. And I just had not had an opportunity before we went into executive session before, so I will express publicly what had been expressed privately to Jim Curry, and that was gratitude for his long-term excellent
Do you do a
service.
letter or something, or
We certainly can. We'll do a letter. We'll draft a letter for you to sign as chairman, Bernie.
whatever you say?
Okay. And just wanted to thank him for his service to
Absolutely.
the city and the audit committee for all these years.
Absolutely. Yeah,
As he
that would be
retires.
nice.
You should know
Thank you.
he's got a letter out now to people looking for the next thing.
You're on record.
That's all right. He sent letters out to people. It's telling him that he's leaving and he's looking for next things in life.
You want to take a motion for adjournment?
Second?
Well, before you get done here, on the record, I don't know. I'd like to have some sense, in an organized way, of where the process of the selection of the new auditor is.
Okay.
The I can do that in public session. I am not directly involved with the procurement because of obvious potential conflict, but the RFP has gone out. We have received and responded to all of the questions that were posed to us by potential providers, and we are awaiting their final proposals.
When are they due?
The end of this month. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Okay, the 21st. I'm sorry, I actually thought it was next week.
And which horses are in the race?
We don't know until they make a proposal.
They have to do the summation.
No, I didn't know.
Right, we don't know. We don't know who is going to propose until we get the proposals.
We do know that none of the big four are proposing.
We do not know who's going to propose, nor have I received any unofficial communication, which wouldn't have been appropriate anyway. So I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Well, we look forward to hearing who's in the race.
Okay.
I move we adjourn.
Second the motion.
Thanks,
Okay.
Michelle.
Right.
Thank
So,
you.